Jumping right back into it, and I want to cover episode 5 in detail because it closes out the tournament preliminaries arc. I want to show off some of the characters' thought processes in depth because I think it's a very character-driven series. So piggybacking off of how episode 4 ended compared to the rest of whatever that was, episode 5 starts out on a pretty solid note. Let's be real, Daewi wasn't fooling anyone, and you can see how much he clearly cares. And to add to that, this is probably the best place so far I've seen them just insert backstory. Following that, they jump straight into the next fight, which literally has 15 seconds of screen time, but with the constraints and the setup from the last episode, fair enough, right?
Perfect KO!
That's not gonna stop me from talking about it. And that's Mori Jin versus Jaehee Byeon. The anime does get one big detail right, and it's that Jaehee Byeon knew how to counter the triple kick, but it's done in such a blink and you miss it kind of way. It comes off more like trash talk than analysis. Like in the manhwa, you really get an idea of how the fighters are thinking based on his explanation, like how he processes information. And because of that analysis, you get to see Mori do his own analysis and make like a split-second decision of how he should handle this scenario. And it shows off the back and forth nature of fighting really well, like having Jaehee sneak in a counterattack, even if it didn't pan out for him, while also having another top tier fighter like Daewi providing his own observations. That's a nice touch. We get some personality beats from Mori here as well as he saves Jaehee from his own attack once he loses consciousness. Mori wins. After this match, the manhwa pans over to Daewi, who's reaching out to his prior opponent, Sungchul Baek, for some help. In their fight, he showed off some knowledge of Re-Taekwondo from just observation. Daewi wants that insight. And Baek agrees to help pretty quick, and I love the reasoning that it's because he mastered phrenology. That expression means Daewi thinks he's cool. And then we get a flashback here of Daewi as a gang member, pre-chill demeanor. So you get to see him exhibit some of the behaviors as the clowns in his earlier parts of the story, but it just goes to show how much of an effect his friend Sung Tae-woo had on him. So the end of episode 4 and the beginning of episode 5 do alright with his character. Even if we don't get to hear about his need for overwhelming victory over Mira, this is fine. I just wish the order was presented differently. Anyway, flashing forward to present day, and this setup is so cool. Baek comments, "The last stage of the Kyokushin secret arts of the four guardian gods. Are you planning on killing your opponent?" It just builds up the hype so much. Not only did he lose to the incomplete attack, but with how analytical he is, he knows this can do some damage. We get another instance of Daewi visiting his friend. He's reading to him, but in the back of his mind, he keeps thinking about when he learned the Kyokushin secret arts attack from his master who has this deep-rooted grudge against Re-Taekwondo. We see Mori talking to Mira after the fact, but in the anime it's a very generalist conversation. In the manhwa we don't get to hear the message. Daewi refuses it because he doesn't want to be in his feelings. He delivers a message of his own though. He tells Mori to fight like his life depends on it. Leading up to the match, we get to see all the judges confirm their biases about who's going to win, whether it be Q, who kinda sorta lost to Mori, right? So of course he's gonna pick him. Or R, who got his arm broken and finds him very impressive. Of course he's picking him as well. But the biggest surprise here, if you're anime only, is that S continues to be a character. And he comes in to say that 2 champions have already been crowned from other regions. One who is particularly violent, and another who wins uniquely by having his opponents withdraw, though he's still really hyped to see the match between these two. And that brings us to the sole preliminaries, Mori Jin versus Daewi Han. Not gonna lie, the anime had it right. The fight before this is the one you skip. We need a lot of time for this. On a technical basis, this fight is astonishing. It's reminiscent of something like Teppu, where they pay a lot of attention to detail when it comes to like the pivots of martial arts. And the animation is amazing, of course, but this is one of those things where you just gotta see some of these panels. There's no way they can capture all of this. So we get a lot of back and forth at the early stages of this fight, but then Mori gets the upper hand. He knocks Daewi down and then eventually offers him a hand to help him back up. Daewi takes Mori's hand, but then he punches his foot. And here's another thing. Since Batman is still a character, we have him commentating the whole thing. Daewi wants to win by any means necessary, but this might be the wrong opponent for that. And since I mentioned panels that went uncaptured, after punching his foot, he kicks him with the kick of Red Phoenix, and this panel is just so, like, I wince looking at it. So these cheap shots are like his way of acknowledging the gap between them, but Daewi has such an X factor with how determined he is in his previous matches. And despite being able to counterattack after this kick, it slipped his mind that shockwaves follow it. This is a bit too much and puts Mori back on the defensive. And something pretty cool here is that Daewi kind of slips into MMA. He's still faithful to his martial art, but I like that the series acknowledges that this is more of a Brazilian kick. After that, Daewi tries some more cheap tactics, but they don't quite work out for him. Mori manages to stop him with a re-taekwondo guard breaker, and then he lands the triple kick. It's deceptively devastating. As Daewi's falling, he starts up the Kyokushin secret arts of the Four Guardian Gods. He sneaks in some pretty clean hits on the first two attacks, but once he makes it to the dance of the White Tiger, they start a crazy back and forth exchange. Mori does eventually manage to break through, but this was just a setup for the final stage attack, the Wave of Blue Dragon. In response to this, Mori attempts to land a true round kick and they clash. And the hype around the Wave of Blue Dragon is justified. Mori gets hit so hard by this that some of the audience members get caught in the splash zone. The true round kick didn't even touch Daewi, but did a ton of damage itself. Mori manages to barely get up before the 10 count, and that's the end of the first round. And to not get too long-winded, I'll say the anime does a pretty good job hitting some story beats here. We get Daewi reacting to Mubong's news that his friend died, Mira arriving to hype him back up, and they even insert some backstory. If I were to nitpick, I wish Batman was still a character because his commentary is top tier. I would also probably shake up the order. Like, this makes sense, I just like it less. Anyway, skipping ahead to the conclusion, I can't leave this part out. Eventually, we come to the final clash, and here Daewi actually manages to basically redirect the energy from Mori's true round kick to release the Wave of Blue Dragon. Now, Mori is also an amazingly intuitive fighter, and from the idea of this, makes his own new technique, the Kick of Blue Dragon, to finally defeat Daewi. Mori wins.
Great!
Alright, so I covered some of how different things can be, how things are out of order, how these characters interact with each other and it's shown off better. I'll hook on to those other champions for now. The one who was winning by forfeits is Ilpyo Park. And the one who is particularly violent is Taek Jegal. And let's start with the latter. He's like the big bad of the Nationals arc. He's also the one that left Man Suk Gong so distraught that he considered ending himself. I don't know what I'm allowed to say, but you know what I'm talking about. Made him more compelling in the manhwa versus the anime. Anyway, the guy is an asshole, and the anime captures that, I guess. Blah, more detail, blah. I do really like the explicit explanations of how his greed chauryeok like absorbs the chauryeok of others it devours, and then all the visuals that go along with that. Oh, and his final fight with Mori is like whatever in the anime. You already know I love the animations, but it is way worse to cut Mori using the other's techniques against him. That's also why I wanted to go over episode 5 in detail, parallel to the manhwa, because you get a good glimpse of that when he uses the Kick of Blue Dragon. So you can see that he will adopt others' techniques and use them in his fighting style. The lack of tension is also crazy. Even watching it back for this, I feel like I missed a tie-in OVA or something. Anyway, Taek's not like a super deep, complex villain, but the manhwa captures his inferiority complex nicely. He has a history with Ilpyo, and I'll transition over to him now. So Ilpyo kinda represents Taek's failure. You get the sense that the one time he lost to him stuck with him, so he just feels like a loser forever. And in regards to their backstory, the anime covers how Taek broke his cousin's leg, but not much else. And since he's a foil to Taek, who's just like a cartoonishly evil dick, he ends up being weirdly flat in the anime. But in the manhwa, I want to highlight that he is insanely methodical. And we can see that on full display as he straight up tells his team, your skills won't be of any help to me at the national level. And they're not offended by this, it's just the logical conclusion that he reached. He wants to act as the ultimate anchor, and basically, if they give him enough time to observe, he's got this. In fact, he already told them about some weaknesses of re-taekwondo, and when it comes to Mori, the only thing he hadn't figured out are the pressure points and the new Kick of Blue Dragon. So with his goal of being the ultimate anchor, he gives them some instructions of how he thinks they can best stop Mori from using those techniques against him. And what's even cooler, it actually works. So in the manhwa, Mori actually loses this fight and Mira has to step up. Daewi is suspended, so he can't participate, but I'll come back to that. And with one of the worst changes, the anime robs us of this because Mori just wins, and we don't get to see Mira come in clutch. And actually, to that end, while I'm thinking about Ilpyo, another character connected to him is Jugok Jeon. He's a minor character, but I'm hoping this will make sense in a bit. So in his backstory, he loses to Ilpyo and it sticks with him just like Taek. And then much later you see he's like being consumed by the greed Chariak, and he has a flashback to how this made him feel. So he acts as like a bridge to some important context that feels left out. So his grandfather, Jae Jeon, is a member of the Six. And I mentioned the greed Chariak, he actually gets killed by Taek. And in the chapter following that, we get some really powerful emotion out of his grandfather. So he lost his grandson, of course he's grieving, but he is demanding to see the person responsible, and he is even willing to fight Mubong over this. I'm underselling it with how quick I'm explaining it, but it was incredible. You do see him in the climax in the anime, but with so much context missing, it makes his actions defending Seoul so much less impactful. You know what I mean? Basically, in comparison, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to the characters in the anime. It's disorienting who they choose to give backstory to, because it's kind of random, when even seemingly minor characters are like fleshed out with motivations. That's what I mean. Minor spoilers, a lot of characters come back later, and this was really fresh in my mind when I first saw the anime because I played Hero Kantare, the gacha game, and that got me to read up to season 5 just before the anime started. Alright, I did mention Daewi's suspension, so I'll give another example of a change making things weaker. So Nationals gets shaken up a bit in general. It's still a 3v3, but it's a best of 5 in the manhwa. You can choose to keep fighting or tag out. If you do tag out, you can't re-enter. Cool, we have the structure. Now, what's important here that gets changed early on is the hype buildup.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
So the reason for his suspension is that Daewi actually interfered in the match between Jugok Jeon and Taek Jegal. Oh, quick aside while I'm thinking about it. He does have like a solo clash with Taek later on that's pretty cool. Anyway, because of this, Daewi cannot participate in Seoul vs. Jeju. Mori is also preoccupied, so it basically comes down to Mira being able to stall or sweep. Now this plot point is in the anime, but because an episode has so many chapters crammed into it, it doesn't have those cliffhanger tension moments. Mira actually loses to Martin in the manhwa, and Mori swoops in at the last second to try his hand at a 3-0. The anime still does show Mori using the Divine Doctor's technique on himself, but it is made super clear that he is on a timer in the manhwa. Like, bomb squad type, they keep flicking back to the time. And, I mean, come on. I knew he was gonna win, right? But the tension is still there. Also in the anime, because Mira just wins, Mori versus Marion is removed, and that's some like Yu Yu Hakusho style disrespectful flexing, and I always love that.
Your eyes are rather slow. Too bad.
So in summary, cramming 112 chapters into 13 episodes is kinda nuts, and if a rumored season 2 does happen, you're gonna need like the One Piece wrap-up movie style OVAs to really fill in some gaps. So I keep using the term character-driven, and that's because the plot gets crazy all on its own. It doesn't need this anime pacing. It's a lot like a fighting game to me. Like if you saw them on a menu, who are you picking? You know, that's what I mean, character-driven. I mean, look, I know the story of a lot of fighting games, but they're not exactly the holy grail of narrative storytelling, if you will. The anime is like trying to piece the story together through a bunch of arcade endings, most of which are ridiculously non-canon. Now, the manhwa may not have the most coherent narrative itself, but imagine trying to piece together the story with the arcade endings, the story mode, the tie-in comics. You get me? I'll catch you guys later.